Picture this in the upscale neighborhood of Qatamia, known for its quiet streets and luxury apartments, a predator is hiding in plain sight. By the day, he blends seamlessly into society. A teacher, a neighbor, just another face among the crowd. But by the night, he becomes something much darker. Someone who lures, manipulates, and ultimately destroys those who trust him. No one suspects him until a string of disappearances unravel the facade and reveals a nightmare that Cairo has never seen before. This is the story of a new Cairo serial killer, a man whose charm hid unspeakable horrors. Stay with me as we uncover the twisted life of Karim Salim, a man who built a double life so intricate, so horrifying, that even his closest neighbors were oblivious. But tonight, these secrets are about to come to light. Hello there, people of the internet. I'm your host, Mint, and welcome to today's case study. If you enjoyed true crime documentary and case studies, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as we'll be covering more in the upcoming future. Now, without any further ado, let's dive into today's case. Karim Salim was an ordinary man, or at least that's what everyone thought. Divorced, middle-aged man, Salim lived in the upscale districts of Katamia, east of Cairo, where he taught English online and lived what appeared to be a quiet life. But beneath the surface, a darker side of him was slowly creeping out, and soon it would be too late to stop him. Born in the early 1980s, Salim grew up in Cairo during a time of rapid social and economic changes in Egypt. His childhood was marked by significant family dysfunction. Neighbors from his youth recalled that his family struggled financially and socially, which set him apart from his peers. Karim Salim's father played a significant role in shaping his early life, setting the foundation of complex psychology that would later emerge. Growing up, Salim faced intense, often harsh discipline at home. His father imposed strict rules and expectations, insisting on obedience and control over every aspect of family life. Any deviation from these expectations was met with punishment, creating an environment that fostered resentment and secrecy in Karim's life. His father's approach was not merely authoritarian, it was marked by emotional distance and lack of affection. He rarely praised or encouraged Karim, leaving him to feel inadequate and alienated within his own family. This strict upbringing planted the seeds of isolation and distrust, which Karim would later carry on into his adulthood. Living in constant fear of punishment or even minor mistakes, Karim learned to conceal his thoughts and emotions, a survival tactic that later allowed him to hide his true nature from the outside world. Academically, Salim excelled. Known for his intelligence, he pursued higher education and eventually trained as a teacher, a career that allowed him to interact with young people and position himself as an authority figure. He had a particular interest in psychology, often citing books and theories about control, manipulation, and power dynamics in personal conversations. To those who knew, Salim seemed introverted and intense, but intelligent and ambitious. Socially, Karim was distant, often described by peers as reserved and difficult to approach. His rigid, control home life left him with little experience in forming genuine connections, and he seemed uninterested in friendships or school social events. Classmates remembered him as the quiet one in the corner, often observing others rather than participating. Karim's lack of engagement with peers combined with his need of control made him an outsider. Though he was truly never bullied or rejected, Karim's interaction with teachers were also telling. He had a reputation for challenging authorities in subtle ways. While he respected the rules, he would often push boundaries intellectually, questioning teachers on the why behind their instructions rather than simply following them. His personal relationships, however, tell a different story. He struggled with maintaining close connections, often described as distant and dismissive. By his late 20s, he had developed a pattern of brief, controlling relationships. According to the acquaintances, his behavior towards women was often manipulative, as he would establish dominance by isolating them from friends and family. As mentioned earlier, Karim was married at some point. His marriage was at least casual, part of the stable and unnoticeable life presented to those around him. He was married for several years, and to the outside world, his marriage appeared unremarkable. Just another typical middle class union in Cairo's upscale community of Qatmiyya. However, those who later examined the case found signs that his marriage was far from ordinary and might have contributed to his double life, and so the facade he so carefully maintained. The exact reason for the divorce has not been fully disclosed, but reports suggest that a pattern of tension and emotional distance in his marriage were likely contributed to the separation. Salim's secretive and controlling nature, coupled with progressively detached behavior, strained their relationships over time. His wife, who reportedly knew little of his dark double life, is believed to have felt isolated within the marriage, possibly sensing there was something off, without fully understanding the extent of his actions. Friends and neighbors mentioned that his wife struggled with the emotional disconnect in their relationship as Salim's demeanor grew colder and more unpredictable over the years. These behaviors might have fostered a breakdown in communication and trust, leading to eventual dissolution of their marriage. After Karim's divorce, he appears to have taken on more reclusive lifestyle, using his newfound privacy to deepen the double life he'd kept hidden for so long. Freed from the everyday scrutiny that the partner might provide, Salim could have immersed himself in his disturbing activities without the risk of raising suspicion. During this period, he expanded his activities online, where he could more easily control interactions and further his manipulations. Salim used various internet forums and private chat rooms discussing themes that aligned with his increasingly sinister interests. His apartment became a controlled environment, a personal space he used to carry out the crimes that would later shock Cairo and unravel the disturbing depths of his obsession with dominance and control. Beyond the surface of his public profile, Salim was known for frequent niche internet forums and private chat groups. There, he discussed topics that hinted at his interest in control and manipulation. These online spaces allowed him to explore and express the darker side of his personality, where he used anonymous accounts to engage in conversations that aligned disturbingly with the mindset behind his crimes. It all started with the disappearance of a young woman. Her name? Her name was Sara El Rafai, a 24-year-old woman who lived in Cairo's bustling city center. She had no connection to Salim that anyone knew of, but for some reason, only Salim could understand Sara. Sara had become his first victim. Sara vanished without a trace in the early March of 2004. At first, no one thought much of it. People go missing all the time in the city, and a large and chaotic as Cairo, well, but as days turned into weeks and no signs of Sara appeared, her family began to panic. She was an active social media user, and her absence was immediately noted by her friends and followers. Something didn't add up. Sara had faced a range of personal struggles, including addiction, which left her in a vulnerable state. Salim exploited this vulnerability to build her trust, positioning himself as a figure of support or guidance, promising her help and stability, ensnaring her in a horrifying trap. Sara's case was initially going cold due to several compounding factors, primarily linked to her lifestyle and the lack of immediate urgency. Sara, struggling with addiction and living somewhat fugitive, was unfortunately perceived as a lower priority for the authorities. Additionally, her background meant that there were fewer consistent connections or people keeping track of her. Without clear leads or public pressure, the investigation began to stall, making it easier for her case to drift towards cold status until her body was found eventually. Sara's body was discovered approximately 2 weeks after she went missing. A body was found in desolate stretch of the highway near outskirts of Cairo. Her body, stripped of dignity, was discarded in a way that sent chill down the spine of investigators. It wasn't just a case of a random murder. It was clear that something methodical, something ritualistic behind it. Now, investigators had a new challenge. How could this woman, with no connections to that area, end up miles from her home under a mysterious circumstances? Only clue left behind was a strange piece of footage, a blurry video from the nearby surveillance camera that seemed to show Sara entering a building. From that point on, the investigations began to zero in one specific area, the upscale districts of Qatmiyya. where the video had traced Sarah's final moments, but there was still no leads on who had taken her life. All that could be seen in the footage was Sarah walking into a building and a figure following closely behind her, but the details were too unclear to make out. It was at this point that the investigation took a chilling turn. The building Sarah entered wasn't just any building. It was Karim Salim's apartment complex. The first connection was made. But it wasn't until weeks later that the investigators uncovered the full extent of Salim's twisted actions. As the police started to dig deeper into Salim's background, they find an unsettling pattern. Salim had been living a double life, one that included drug trafficking, human trafficking, and a strange obsession with recording his personal moments, including his encounters with women. It was in this hidden world that the true horror of his crimes began to emerge. By the time the investigation had linked Salim to the crime, two other women had been reported missing under similar circumstances. Each victim's body was found miles from where they were last seen, their fates sealed by a man who had found his own twisted form of power in manipulating and killing those who he brought into his life. To the people living in Katmaya, Salim was just another neighbor. No one suspected him. After all, how could they? He was quiet and no one saw his darkness hidden behind his eyes. But when his past was examined, his relationship with these women became clear. And it was just the beginning of a much more complex and horrifying story. As the investigation deepened, so too did the layers of Salim's secret life. It became clear that his actions weren't the result of a sudden, impulsive decision. They were each premeditated. Each step Salim took seemed calculated, as though he had been planning these horrors for months, if not years. But what drove him to these extremes? Was it the thirst of power, control, or something far more insidious? His social media accounts, typically used to portray a mild-mannered teacher, revealed something altogether different. Hidden in the shadows of his posts were subtle signs of his obsession. Online forums, private chat rooms, and even secretive YouTube videos that seemed innocent at first glance now became a piece of a puzzle that no one could ignore. These postings about extreme fetishes, cryptic messages, and about control and submission that hinted at much darker side to Salim. But what truly terrified investigators wasn't just his online activities, no, but the discovery of what was happening in his apartment. When the police raided Salim's apartment in early May, they found far more than they could have imagined. But what they uncovered in his home was a nightmare. Hours upon hours of recordings, most too disturbing to share publicly, showing Salim's acts with the woman he lured into his web. And worse still, he had been documenting these horrific acts from the moment they had entered his life. Salim's obsession with control had gone far beyond anything. In his apartment, police found a collection of videos, a visual recording of the terror he inflicted on his victims. Some were filmed during the drugs and while the others, shockingly, were recorded after their death. These weren't just casual recordings, they were methodical, precise. He had taken malicious care of film each step of the way. Each of the women, Sarah included, had a history of drug use, and Salim had used to his advantage. He'd prey upon these addictions, manipulating them into a situation where they had little control over what was happening. As the case continued to unravel, more information began to surface. The more police dug, the more Salim's dark history came to light. Investigators learned that for years, he had been living a double life, one that masked his darker desires under a veneer of respectability. But now those layers were being peeled back, and what they found was chilling. In his confession, Salim was disturbingly calm. When confronted with the evidence, he didn't express guilt. He didn't even seem to feel the weight of what he had done. To Salim, it seemed like they were nothing more than an object. He detailed how he used his charm to manipulate these women into coming to him and how he had carefully orchestrated their deaths. And perhaps the most shocking part of it all, he never once seemed to view them as people. Through his confession, investigators pieced together the full scope of Salim's crimes, learning that his reach extended beyond these three women. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Salim wasn't just a random predator. His crimes were methodical, cold, and driven by overwhelming need for control. But what made his case so chilling was the sheer audacity of it. How Salim, a man living in the heart of Cairo's most affluent district, had been able to hide in plain sight for so long. Over the course of the trial, the media had been relentless in covering the details of this case. Public interest had been on the charts, social media was ablaze, the speculation with many calling for the death penalty, and the hashtag New Cairo Serial Killer became a trending topic across Egypt. Finally, on September 12th, 2024, after months of deliberation, Karim Salim was sentenced to death. His fate was sealed, but for many, the sentence didn't bring closure. How could a man like Salim ever be truly held accountable for the sheer horror he inflicted on his victims? As the sentence was handed down, the people of Cairo could finally begin to breathe again. But the damage had already been done. Salim had shown the world just how easily darkness could hide behind the facade of normalcy. He had exposed a terrifying truth that sometimes evil doesn't lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it lives right next to you. And with that being said, I've been your host, Mint. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.